My in-laws were drunk at the wedding, oblivious to the whispers around them. They turned to me, their voices loud and slurred. "Well, it's too late now that you're married, but if you really want to be part of this family, you need to prove you have enough money," they said. "That's right," his mother added. "So, from now on, consider giving us $1,000 a month, a little bonus for joining the family." I stared at them in shock, my face draining of color. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to make such demands at my own wedding reception, no less. Before I could even respond, my father grabbed the microphone from them. "Enough is enough. Do you realize how embarrassing you're being?" he said firmly. "My name is Linda, a 30-year-old office worker. I'm currently engaged to Larry, who is 32. We met through a mutual friend who was worried about my single status and decided to introduce us. At first, I felt nothing romantic toward Larry, despite his persistent efforts to win me over, but his kindness, patience, and sincerity slowly broke down my walls. Over time, I found myself drawn to him, and eventually, I realized I wanted to be with him forever. After a year of dating, he proposed, and I said yes. Larry understood me in a way no one else did. He was always kind, always reassuring. "Don't worry," he would tell me. "If you ever feel uncertain, I'll be here. You can count on me, Linda. I love you." His words touched my heart. He truly wanted to make me happy, and because of that, I wanted to do the same for him. When I told my father about our engagement, he was so overjoyed that he cried. "Linda, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you," he said, wiping his eyes. "Dad, you're being dramatic," I laughed. "Of course I am. I was always worried you might never get married," he admitted. "You were? I had no idea," I said, surprised. "Every father worries about his daughter," he replied, "but now, I can finally relax. Congratulations." Hearing those words from the man who raised me alone meant the world to me. I had no doubt he would shed even more tears at the wedding, probably more than me. And so, Larry and I began planning for our big day. With both of us juggling work and wedding preparations, life became a whirlwind. Weekdays were packed with deadlines, and weekends were dedicated to finalizing wedding details. On a rare free day, we planned a visit to Larry's parents' house, the first time I would meet them. Larry had already met my father right after proposing, but due to scheduling conflicts, I hadn't yet had the chance to visit his parents. Finally, after months of waiting, we arranged a meeting. As we arrived, nerves crept in. "Don't worry," Larry reassured me. "My parents are really kind." His words calmed me slightly, and I rang the doorbell. His mother answered. "Mom, I'm home," Larry greeted cheerfully. "Welcome home, Larry. It's good to see you," she said warmly, before turning to me. I smiled politely and introduced myself. "Nice to meet you. My name is Linda, and I'm Larry's fiancée." She gave me a once-over, her friendly tone vanishing. "So, you're Linda," she said coolly. Her attitude remained cold as she led us into the living room. "Linda, I need to know what you bring to the table," she began. "Larry is our treasure, our only son. If you're going to marry him, you need to prove you're worthy. Are you?" I blinked, taken aback. I hadn't expected an interrogation. "You're joining our family," she continued. "Are you truly ready for that?" I almost laughed. This wasn't some prestigious dynasty or royal bloodline. Why was she acting like I needed to pass a test? Besides, it's not like I was going to live with them. I struggled to find the right words, but before I could respond, her patience snapped. When I ask a question, I expect an answer immediately. How rude. she snapped. I sat there in stunned silence, realizing for the first time what kind of family I was about to marry into. She snapped. I'm asking if you're ready for this. Her voice kept rising, the tension thick in the air. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to steady myself and say, I hope that Larry and I will support each other in our marriage. But my words did nothing to convince her. What a naive thing to say, she scoffed. You're not just going to support each other, you're supposed to support Larry. That's your duty as his wife. You clearly don't understand the basics. Before I could respond, Larry's father, who had been silent until now, stepped in. Honey, calm down, he said, placing a hand on his wife's arm. Then he turned to me with an apologetic smile. Sorry about that, Linda. You must have been startled by my wife's words. I forced a polite smile. It's all right. Maybe she was just overprotective of her only son. Maybe she was nervous and spoke without thinking. Just then, Larry's brother entered the room. His voice was calm, his demeanor gentle, and for a brief moment, I felt relief. But that relief was short-lived. With a pleasant smile, he said something that made my heart drop. My wife is actually right, but what concerns me the most is that you come from a single-parent family. I frowned. What do you mean by that? He sighed as if explaining something obvious. Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a great public image. Naturally, we can't be too thrilled about welcoming someone like that as the wife of our only son. I stiffened. Excuse me? I said, my voice sharper than before. What exactly is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked incredibly hard to raise me on his own. I'm proud of him and the life he gave me. It doesn't make me any less of a person. But they weren't finished. Since you grew up without a mother, you never learned how to be a proper wife, how to handle housework. For instance, his mother argued. I clenched my fists but kept my voice steady. I did plenty of housework to help my father. I can cook well, too, so please don't assume things about me. She completely ignored my words. Instead, she leaned forward and declared, I will allow you to marry Larry, but only if you promise to devote yourself completely to us. After all, we are Larry's parents. Can you promise me that? I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What? She sighed impatiently. You came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, didn't you? That means you understand your responsibilities, right? I wanted to say something, anything, but they barely gave me a chance to respond. The conversation continued without me, like I was just a background character in my own life. That night, as I lay in bed, I turned to Larry, still shaken. Larry, do your parents always talk to people like that? He barely looked up. What do you mean? I hesitated. I mean, the way they spoke to me, the things they said. Larry shrugged. They were just making sure you were ready for marriage. I blinked. He didn't see the problem? I understand that they're concerned, I said carefully. But, don't you think they went too far? Larry sighed. As if I was being difficult. They didn't say anything wrong, and besides, they gave us their blessing, so there's nothing to worry about. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. I suddenly realized Larry wasn't on my side. Sensing my hesitation, he pulled me into a hug. Linda, don't stress about it. My parents are just upset because their only son is getting married. It's normal. But his words didn't reassure me. It's all going to be fine, he murmured. They just want what's best for us. They want us to have a strong marriage like theirs. That's why they were a bit harsh. I swallowed hard. Oh, really? I muttered. Maybe he was right. Maybe they just had high expectations. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, one thing kept gnawing at me. They had looked down on me just because I was raised by a single father. And Larry, didn't see anything wrong with that. What kind of strong marriage did they really have? And more importantly, was I walking into the right one? The wedding day. The day of the wedding arrived, filled with excitement. Relatives, friends, colleagues, and even our bosses gathered to celebrate. I walked down the aisle with my father, the man who had raised me, who had always been by my side. Larry and I exchanged vows and rings, sealing our marriage with a kiss. Applause filled the air, and for the first time, I truly felt the weight of the moment. I was getting married, and despite my worries, a deep sense of happiness filled me. As we entered the reception hall, we were surrounded by warm smiles, heartfelt congratulations, and nostalgic conversations with old friends. I pushed my doubts aside. I was glad I had chosen to marry Larry. I wanted to cherish this day. After the ceremony, we planned to register our marriage and officially start our life together. Everything was perfect until the final part of the event. Larry and I stood with our parents, greeting guests as they left. That's when I noticed it. His parents were unsteady on their feet, their faces flushed red. They had drunk too much. Some guests whispered amongst themselves, concerned. Others tried to ignore it, but just when I thought we could wrap up the night quietly, everything took a turn. Larry's mother suddenly grabbed my hand, yanking me away from Larry. She yelled, her voice echoing through the hall like a wrestler hyping up a fight. "Listen to me, Linda. Now that this wedding is over, you're going to devote yourself entirely to us. We're going to test you, so you better be ready." The room went silent. Some guests chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. Others shifted uncomfortably. Then, Larry's father grabbed the microphone. "Linda, don't you feel embarrassed wearing a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all." His wife nodded in agreement. "Dear, you should tell her the truth." I felt a lump form in my throat as the whispers among the guests grew louder. I turned to Larry, desperately hoping he would step in. But he didn't. Instead, he sighed and said, "I can't do anything about it. My parents aren't saying anything wrong." And that's when I knew. Larry would never stand up for me. And this marriage, this life I had just promised myself to, was not what I thought it would be. I was certain of it. Even as the hall buzzed with chatter, my in-laws remained drunk, spewing insults without restraint. "Well, you're already married, but if you're going to be part of this family, you need to prove that you have enough money," they slurred. "That's right," they added. "After you register your marriage, you should send us a few $1,000s every month. Oh, and your entire bonus too." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were demanding money at our wedding reception? I stared at them, speechless. Then, my father calmly took the microphone from their hands. "Enough of this," he said, his voice steady yet firm. "Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves?" My in-laws scowled. "Why are you interrupting us?" Larry's mother sneered. I knew this woman's father was no good. Single parents are never any good. That was the final straw. I clenched my fists, but before I could speak, my father responded. "You people are even worse than I imagined," he said, his tone still composed but cutting. "You refuse to meet me just because I raised my daughter alone. And yet, you work for President Scott, one of the most respected men in the industry? I assumed his employees would have some decency." At that, my father-in-law's face turned pale. How do you know President Scott?" he stammered. My father let out a dry chuckle. "He's a business partner of my company, and an old friend." A gasp rippled through the room. Speaking of single parents, my father continued, "President Scott was raised by his mother alone. So in your arrogance, you just insulted the president of the very company you work for." The color drained completely from my father-in-law's face. The man who had just been looking down on me now looked as if the ground had crumbled beneath him. I apologize, sir, he stuttered, and then, in a move that stunned everyone, he dropped to his knees. Please, he begged, don't tell the president about this. The shift was almost comical. Moments ago, he had been lording over me. Now, he was utterly defeated. The guests erupted into laughter. Some even pulled out their phones to record the moment. My father merely shook his head. No amount of apologizing can take back your words. Then, he turned to me. Linda, do you want to go home? I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. I took the microphone from Larry's hand, my voice clear and unwavering. Thank you all for the entertainment, I announced, my gaze sweeping over Larry, his parents, and the stunned guests. But there will be no marriage. A hush fell over the hall. I'll return all the money and gifts given for this occasion, I added. Then, without another glance at Larry or his family, I walked out, hand in hand with my father. As I stepped away, I caught a final glimpse of Larry and his parents, their faces frozen in shock. Their relatives swarmed them, whispering frantically. The entire reception had spiraled into chaos. In the following days, I made sure to return every wedding gift and apologize to the guests. To my surprise, they weren't upset at all. Instead, they praised me and my father. Good for you, some said. You stood up for yourself. You dodged a bullet, others added. And as it turned out, word of the fiasco spread far beyond the wedding. Larry's colleagues, who had attended, shared the incident with their coworkers. Soon, Larry gained an unfortunate reputation, known as the man too weak to stand up to his toxic parents. The embarrassment was too much for him. Eventually, he resigned. As for my father-in-law, news of the incident reached President Scott himself. The result? A demotion. He was transferred to an insignificant division, sent to a remote office far from the company's headquarters. I later heard that Larry's family became outcasts among their relatives. But honestly, they had no one to blame but themselves. Actions have consequences. A new chapter. In the wake of it all, I found something far more valuable than a failed marriage, a renewed bond with my father. We spent more time together, and I gained an even deeper appreciation for everything he had done for me. Then, one day, he sat me down with a serious expression. Linda, he said, are you interested in running the business? I blinked. You mean, why don't you start working toward becoming the president of my company? His words took me by surprise. It was a big responsibility, a huge step. But I could see it in his eyes. He believed in me. I'll do my best, I promised, feeling both nervous and excited. From that moment on, I made a decision. Instead of wasting time on the wrong people, I would focus on my career. I wanted to prove to myself and to my father that I was capable. That one day, I could be a great leader like him. Moving forward, now, I'm fully immersed in learning everything I can about my father's company. The work is demanding, but every challenge is an opportunity to grow. And as I reflect on everything that happened, I feel nothing but relief. Larry's family turned what should have been a joyous occasion into a disaster. But in the end, they did me a favor. Because the marriage was never legally registered, I was able to walk away, completely free. No toxic in-laws, no controlling husband, no regrets. And with that, I'm stepping into the future with confidence. I don't know exactly where this path will take me. But I do know one thing. I made the right choice. Thank you for staying till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing. And I hope to see you in the next video.